Video today is dealing with rational coefficients when solving equations with variables on both sides. If you recall, we've already been talking about solving equations with variables on both sides, but now I want to talk about when we're dealing with something a little bit more challenging when the coefficients, remember the numbers in front of the variable, is a rational number, is a fraction. How do I deal with that? So there's two methods I'm going to show you today. It's just brief, so make sure you do copy everything down in your notes, and then we're going to talk more about it in depth tomorrow. So the first way, method number one, is just to use common denominators. So I'll notice that between these two, okay, if I'm looking at these two, it's okay, I've got 2/3 x and I got negative 1/6 x on two different sides of the equation. Notice your variable terms. You want to change 2/3 into 4/6. The reason you want to do that is so that you have a common denominator. And so that's what I did right here. This stayed the same, except over here 2/3 turned into 4/6. And again, how did I do that? Well, I multiplied by 2. I multiplied actually 2 over 2. This got multiplied by 2 and the 3 also. Okay, so now I'm at this point. Next, I want to go ahead and do the same as I did before. I want to move the smaller variable term using the inverse operation. So between these two, the smaller one would be negative 1/6. So I add 1/6 to both sides. If I do that, you can follow along. You can see that these two will cross out on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, 4/6 plus 1/6 equals 5/6. The negative one is also just brought down. Okay. Step 3 would then be to move the constant term to the next, to the other side. So this is very similar to what we were doing. The only difference here is this portion here is changing that the fractions to be the same, so you can add and subtract them. But everything else is the same as before. So that means I take a look at my variable term. Next to it is this constant. I move this constant by saying, okay, look, it's negative, so I have to add 1 to both sides. I do that. The last part is to use the multiplicative inverse. So I've got this 5/6 in front of this x. I need to divide that out. Well, how do I divide that? I can use the multiplicative inverse. I multiply by its reciprocal. I flip it over and I multiply. And then I just simplify it. I find out that my answer is 12, and then I can check my work. Check by going, remember how to check. I find out my answer is 12. I go back to my original question and I plug in 12 wherever I see an x. All right, I put parentheses there. So notice I wrote 2/3, that's right here, 2/3 times x, which I think is 12, minus 1, equals 9 minus 1/6 times x, which again I plugged in for 12. So I can go ahead and do this. Simplify my work, right? 2 times 12 divided by 3 is 8. Over here, negative 1 times 12 divided by 6 is negative 2. And then I just double check that works out. 8 minus 1 is 7, and 9 minus 2 is also 7. So it works out for both. The second method I have for you, I'm using the same exact question so you could see how this works, is called fraction busting. This is to just get rid of fractions. All right, and you can do that. Okay, so what I do is I find a common denominator with all of my numbers this time. So 2/3, that's one of my numbers, negative 1, 9, and negative 1/6. Those are the 4 numbers that I have there. So I look at all this and I say, look, between 3, 1, 1, and 6, what's the common denominator? I would have to say that common denominator is 6. Okay, so I can multiply this by 2 to get to 6, these by 6 to get to 6, and this one I can leave alone. So I figure out that's my common denominator, and then I use that common denominator to multiply everything. All 4 terms get multiplied by 6. So I'll do one at a time. 2/3 times 6 is 4, right? 6 times 2 divided by 3 is 4. 6 times negative 1 is negative 6. 6 times 9 is 54, and 6 times negative 1/6, let's see, 6 times negative 1 divided by 6, negative 1. So what happens is I'm going to distribute that and multiply each one of these. So again, 6 times 2/3 is 4, so I change that to 4x. Negative 1 turns into negative 6. 9 turns into 54. And the negative 1/6 turns into negative 1 with an x after it. So what I've done is I'm allowed to do that because in an equation, as long as you multiply everything on both sides, you should be fine. And that's what I did. I multiplied everything by 6. I get this thing here. Now this is much easier to deal with, right? Now I just take a look at this and I say, well, okay, look, between these two, choose the smaller variable term. That is negative 1x. I add that. I use the inverse operation. add that 1x to both sides. If I do that, I get 5x minus 6 equals 54. And next, you just go through your process. You add your constant term to both sides, you divide by your coefficient, you get your answer, and then you check again. And I didn't check on this one, but I checked on the previous example, so it's the same thing. But I want to show you there's two different methods. So there's fraction busting and there's using common denominators. It kind of depends on how comfortable you are with fractions, which one you want to use, but make sure you have both of the methods written down in your notes so that we can discuss it tomorrow.